And I've been encouraging my kids as well to not, this is sort of bigger than music, but not watch other people doing cool stuff.
But try to do stuff.
But actually do stuff yourself. It's like, why are you watching somebody do cool stuff on your phone when you could go outside? You've got a skateboard, you've got a bike, you've got a guitar, you've got a piano, you've got a boat. Get the hell out there, live your life. Don't spend your life watching other people do cool stuff while you're sitting on your couch,
Run through the fields, another holiday. Burning in the lungs, but your mind escapes. One for the ages, straight into the fire. Through the ashes of waiting, you're outpacing desire.
Hey there, music lovers. Welcome to Why Music Matters, the podcast where we examine the power and influence that music can wield in our lives. I'm your host, Jeff Miers.
Start again, you just start again from wherever you were.
On today's episode, I'm joined in the studio by two members of a band that has spent the last 30 plus years embodying the very definition of indie music. Privett and Terry Clark are 2/5 of Carbon Leaf, the Richmond, Virginia band that has spent the past 3 decades crafting a body of work that blends elements of rock, Americana, pop, and folk, and performing that work to devout audiences in excess of 3,500 times. Along the way, they became the first unsigned independent band to perform on the American Music Awards. Shared stages with the Dave Matthews Band, John Mayer and Jason Mraz, among many others. And consistently taking us back to a time when eclecticism and diversity within a band's sound were considered an absolute positive. During our chat, which took place on the afternoon of their late April performance at Buffalo Ironworks, Barry and Terry spoke freely about their journey, the importance of embracing the moment with a sense of urgency in both life and music, and the trials and triumphs of a life spent being truly independent. Welcome to Why Music Matters, Barry Privett and Terry Clark of Carbon Leaf.
Stop to stare, rolling side by side with youth and eternity left if we ignore the truth now. Time is the playground, and the high-rise cityscape fades as the conversation's winding down. As the engine vibrates, it threads me like a needle.
Well, welcome to Why Music Matters, everybody. Your host, Jeff Miers. Good to see you all again. Today is a very cool day for me. I've been a fan of the band Carbon Leaf for, I won't say how long, but a long time.
You'll out everybody. You'll out everybody.
I don't want to out everybody. We're about the same age. But I'm really happy to have Barry and Terry from Carbon Leaf here in the studio with me today. They're playing tonight at Buffalo Ironworks. And I am greatly looking forward to the show and appreciate you guys making time for me. They, in fact, hopped right out of the bus and into the studio.
Literally.
So I appreciate it, guys. I thought I wanted to start with you guys talking about the idea of the album as a cohesive artistic statement, because I think, again, we're around the same age, been through some of the same things. We've been told for a long time that that is dead. that is not the way to go. I don't want to speak for you, but I assuming that you would beg to differ with that idea. So how important is it to you to have an album that makes a cohesive statement that, for me anyway, the last album is a great example. It kind of demanded to be listened to as a whole, and then repeatedly, but as a piece. You can pull out the individual pieces of it if you want, but it makes sense as a whole. Is this important to you guys? And what are your thoughts on this whole idea that the album is dead? Because it sure doesn't seem it to me.
Yeah, I guess it just it depends on a couple of things. What do you want to do? And you kind of balance what you want to do with kind of what the current strategy should be that everybody's telling you to do. And is the album dead or not? I don't know. Does it matter, or is it does that matter if you're a 20-year-old artist breaking in and versus a band that's been around for 33 years and knowing your audience and what those tastes are. So I wouldn't sit here and die on the hill that claims that album is not dead, but it seemed like, as you said, this particular project lent itself towards a theme. Time is the playground. This is what we have in the now to work with, and if you're trying to express variations on those themes, then an album made sense. And and just from a creative standpoint, really, it's like it would be more rewarding to, if you're writing a chapter of a book, to finish writing the book instead of just like releasing things piecemeal. It didn't feel like that was the way to go. And it's, I like world building. We write something and then we get in the studio and we fashion it to kind of relate to each other, songs. So, and I would say a lot of our albums in the past maybe didn't necessarily need to be albums, you know what I mean? That felt like there were...
There are certainly strong singles, for sure.
Sure. But, it's nice to kind of cozy up to an idea and see it through. And
then our fans have reacted really well, too, because most of our fans are, in kind of the 30 to 60 age range. They're not necessarily teenagers or tweens and stuff with limited attention spans. They're ready to sink in, and we released this album on vinyl too, and people are really enjoying being able to just put on a side and chill out, and you actually just listen to the music from start to finish, as opposed to like hit and shuffle, hit and skip. You can't do that on vinyl.
Or letting the algorithm decide what you're going to listen to next.
Exactly.
But it still is going to be a challenge to get people into, all of it. What I mean? You're still promoting a single or two, right?
Sure.
And then you still have the rest of the record. But it was nice to hear some fan feedback about the quote deep cuts, in the back that feel just as good as some of the earlier ones. So, whether you're doing like this waterfall release or releasing singles, it's like, well, we have an album, we have 12 songs, and if most people haven't heard the other 11, then we have all the time in the world to still introduce those. If
that's
we
right,
want,
it stays
video
new,
or
it
whatever.
Stays new.
It's just like, hey, check this out.
That makes a lot of sense. You as lyricist, is important to you to have a bigger canvas like that? Like this, Life is a Playground is thematically. I don't want to impose ideas on you, but as a listener, okay, cool. I'm going to go ahead
Still
and do that.
Still early in the morning, so I might need help. It's not early.
The lyrics just have a thematic through line.
Yeah.
It's mirrored in the music and vice versa. But did that canvas, and I'm speaking of the album as a canvas, just to be pretentious, does that idea appeal to you though as a writer?
It does, just busting out a single and then working it through from starting to recording and producing, and then releasing it just doesn't seem as fun to me. It doesn't seem like there's enough energy to it. You kind of have the same, build up and then kind of this exhale, whether it's a single or whether it's an album. So it's like the journey kind of feels like it resonates more emotionally with me. It's like you can, you think on it more. And, like you said, with this album, with the through line, we were coming up with a project and we wanted to make kind of more of a rock record because the last few albums, or the EPs, I should say, were more acoustic based. And it had been a long time since we'd gotten the electric guitars out and kind of just really dug in a little bit. And so, as I was picking some of our demos to write to, some of those demos were brand new ones that we had just written. Some of them went back 15, 18 years and were recorded in our basement on a tape deck. And I was like, as I was pulling these kind of disparate parts together, the idea of the spans of time, kind of just hit me, and bringing some of these old things in, chopping away parts that didn't work, keeping certain parts of them. It was just kind of like you were in a chop shop, and the songs from different eras of our career were kind of coming together to make a comment. So I was like, time is the playground is kind of a way of saying, this is while we're alive on Earth, this is what we have in our 80 years or whatever. Yeah. You can pull from all different parts of your life.
80. Phew.
Well, if you're lucky. If you're a musician, it'd be more like 76, I think. 74.
And speaking of, that thematic through line, rumination on time's passage, I guess, the nature of time, but also implicit in that, in my interpretation of the record, is this sort of seize the day, the urgency of being in the moment. Embracing that part of it that we can actually control. Is that accurate, first of all? And how does that apply to this brotherhood that you guys have had going on for, more than 30 years?
Yeah, it is. And, and it's not just so much like seize the moment, but kind of as you mature, you kind of, it's like when seize the moment almost feels like a young person's game, right?
Sure,
but then you have all these other things that heap on you as you gain life experience, right? So it's really as much that as it is, recognize the moment that you're in and all of the things that, you do have where you might be considering them holding you back. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's like, there's a song at Neon Signs where it's like there's all these life choices that we can make, and you can go in all these different directions, but for one reason or another, you're on the path that you're on. And so, if you're not on a good one, right, recognize that. If you're on a good one, if you got it pretty good, right, don't keep looking backwards, at these other things that could have changed your life some other way.
Yeah.
It's more about being kind of, contented in the choices you've made.
Oh, nuts, pardon me. Does that apply at all to this sense of urgency and how you just described it, which was really eloquently? I noticed it's been a hard touring band. I don't see a whole lot of days off. I see multiple nights without days off a lot.
I know it's funny because I hurt my shoulder in February, and I just had surgery, so this is our first show back, but I was getting physical therapy on Monday right before we left to head up to Pittsburgh, the first stop on this run, and physical therapist was like, I was looking at your schedule, man, and you guys are doing 4 nights in a row. That seems like a lot. Is that hard? I was like, dude, 4 nights? Are you kidding me?
Luxury.
That's easy. That's 4 nights is nothing. Why do you do 30 nights in a row?
That's just,
we do some
too much,
some stuff that's a little bit nuts, but 4 nights it's not bad, but
Well, getting back to the whole essence of time and your kind of place where you are in it now, when we were younger, we toured more, but we would stretch out and we'd be over in California for, 9 days with, 4 shows and these days off because the label wanted you to hang around for whatever thing, ridiculous thing, or hitting all these markets where you just, didn't necessarily need to be, right? But you could get away with it because you were younger and you didn't have, a wife and kids and a dog and a mortgage and, sports. And now you have to kind of choose what's the most important thing, what's doable. So you're not on tour, endlessly, and you have that life balance,
Yeah. That's a big one, which I did want to talk to you about because my own experience, far less road work than you guys, but about 11 years in a band formed in college and doing that hard. And the big pivotal moment is one, like say 31 or 32, and people start to have families. People, that's a big one. It ended up being the end of the band I was in at the time. But that's a big one to overcome when that priority shift happens, or at least it probably should. If it doesn't, then you have to get through the divorces and everything else. But that's a big one. And for you guys to 33 years on, essentially, be playing with many of the people who were your college buddies is a pretty monumental achievement.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're really fortunate and blessed to have great families that are included in the Carbon Leaf family.
That's awesome.
This is Uncle Barry. Our kids, all go out. Barry takes all the kids out for their birthdays, and it's big party with Uncle Barry, barbecues, and everybody's,
Yeah, that sounds like fun.
It is. It's really a family kind of environment, and it's, I'm not going to lie, it's tough when we're on the road and our wives and kids sort of have to deal with things logistically, or emotionally without us. But it's nice that you can now check in with FaceTime, and we can talk to everybody multiple times a day, as opposed to the old days when you had to my dad was in the Navy when he was at sea. When I was a kid, you talked to him once in 6 months, or something like that. Ridiculous amount of time to not have any communication with your parents.
Hard.
It's hard. But now it's like my daughter's like, "Hey, I want to watch this TV show. Call me up. Is this good? What's your password for Amazon Prime? Can I get?" And it's like, "Oh, cool. How was your day?" You can just chitty chat and catch up, and it's like you feel like you're still plugged in, but you could be home. So having that tether is nice. That's certainly been one of the, improvements in touring in the last 20 years, where it's definitely taken a lot of that stress away from I have no idea what's happening at home. I don't know what it's like.
Plus, but when the guys are home, they're home.
That's huge.
They're picking their kids up from school. They're driving to the sports. They're making them. They're at home. Dad.
Quality time, full
quality time really kicks in. So, we try to keep our touring down to 80 days a year, which is down from what
double that at least.
And so I think it's not perfect, but pretty good. Try to steer away from certain holidays or birthdays best we can, but it's not always perfect.
I've seen that from the other side as a parent now, because my kid is out touring, and it's the same thing. We're trying to hook up, just to have that sense of you're sharing in each other's lives, even when you're away or this person's on the other side of the world or whatever. It is a big deal. With the live show, which has obviously been central to your existence, or the records are too, but the live show, for me, the times I've seen you always felt more like the idea was a sort of communion with the audience more than just a performance. Does that resonate with you at all? Because it just feels like it's a shared activity more than it is here we are, we're playing our tunes for you.
Yeah.
Hope you dig it. Bye. It feels like I don't want to be too corny or anything, but I'm going there. It's just who I am. You feel like you're just kind of entered into a sort of sacred space with the band, and then there's stuff being shared there. You know what I mean?
Well, we've been really lucky to have an awesome, supportive audience, for many years, and you see some turnover, but you also see multiple generations. You'll end up with 3 generations of a family at a show, and it's really cool. It's like, I grew up on your music, and now my kids grown up on your music, and we're all here and we're enjoying the show. And just to see the people in the audience reacting like that, we feed off that energy, and it feels, that's why we're out there, is to make that connection. Because they could play the record at home, or they could listen to even a live recording, or
your stuff's on the archive, which is cool.
Yeah,
too,
but it's not the same as being in the room and feeling the energy and feeling the love that everybody's got for each other and the music, and it helps us perform, and it becomes cyclical. We feed off each other, the audience and the band, for sure. It's important.
You said that a lot better than I did.
Yeah, and our roots were as a college band. Like we didn't start as an original band because we didn't know this was something that we were going to do. We were just guys that got together and
let's jam some tunes.
Learned a handful of covers and got up and played live, in front of our friends. And that's such a power to it. Just being in that environment. And so when we started writing our own music, then we still retained that essence of being in this small room with all these people and having this kinetic kind of energy. And how do you trade off of that? And it's not about writing music that will cater to someone like that. We definitely write what we want to write, and then hopefully those people, you find the resonance in their fans. But that's fun to me. That's a live show, is getting up there and doing that, not just kind of being up there and being a shoegazer or just not having that energy of that symbiotic relationship, I guess.
Yeah.
It's like I'm looking around the room for, ways to engage during the set, and some nights there's tons of material to work with, and sometimes there's not, and you just kind of do your thing, but each night's going to be different.
I've seen you get like a look of kind of mischievous joy on your face, like when you're doing this, you're living for it, that translates.
I mean, that's the best 2 hours of your day on tour is the show. So And it's again getting back to that, being present in your moment, like, hey, this is the playground. This is what you got to work with right now, and so it's kind of a self-discipline to not go too inward.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can and you should. People want to see that, but they also want to be disarmed by, you being there and them, always considering what the fan has to do to come out. We played in Pittsburgh last night. It's a Tuesday night. They got things going on. Babysitters. They got to they got to know what time the dog's got to go out and pee, and they got to get date night coordinated and dinner, and so there's a lot of energy that comes with that ticket, and that's you want to cash in on that anticipation
and. Similar last night, so it was really cool. There was a girl that was sitting off by herself. She came over after the show. We played at a venue called City Winery, and there's several of them around. And she's like, I work here. I came to the show last year. I worked, and it was such an unbelievable show, and I enjoyed myself so much, and it just felt so different than all of our other shows that I requested tonight off and bought a ticket well ahead of time so that I could come to the shows. Like, usually I work all the shows, but I needed to come and be in the audience and be part of it again. It was really cool. It's like, wow, it's when the staff is that you can always tell
if you can impress the staff.
If you can,
right.
It's like
they'd be the most jaded.
They've seen it all. They are the most jaded. So when you've turned, when the staff is on your side and part of the family, then you're doing stuff right too.
Yeah, that's major. Bands that form in college, I can think of. Everyone from like Fish to REM. I mean, you guys, there is a special thing that kind of grows out of that, it feels like to me. Did you guys have any role models in that, or were you too busy actually being it to reflect on it?
Yeah, I mean, we had some bands that definitely kind of gave us our early breaks, in town, like Fighting Gravity was one. They were called Boy Oh Boy at the time. They were a ska band, but they were gracious enough to, like, when we got out of college, they gave us opening slots, and we'd go play to their 1,000 people, and getting our starts that way.
But we were also following in the footsteps, kind of, not necessarily musical role models or stuff that but we had the Dave Matthews Band as a Virginia band that kind of came from the same circuit, before,
right around the time.
Yeah, before us, Hootie and the Blowfish, John Mayer, Edwin McCain, kind of all these kind of Southern bands were doing these similar college town circuits down there. And we sort of said, hey, why don't we try to do that? We're not exactly where you could go and you could play a frat house or a sorority house and actually make some money. And then you could support your other 3 gigs that week that don't make any money at these different bars and stuff like that. It's like, all right, this worked for them. Let's try to do, if it's good enough for Dave Matthews and John
I can
Mayer,
see that working.
Let's try to do that. So
and it was still an analog world when we were starting out. It's like live music was a thing. Going out and seeing stuff was a thing. You weren't staying at home on devices and, for a while there. So it was a good time to kind of just get in without all of the, other options for people's, attention.
Vying for their attention.
A lot of other distractions weren't there yet. Yeah.
Yeah, true. And it was a pretty remarkable time. And even just the bands you mentioned and you guys, like, I feel like we were being, around the same age, lucky to come up in a time when being eclectic or eclecticism in a band was considered like, you know what I mean? Like this was good. Like this is the idea. We want it to be somewhat challenged or have our conceptions of what a genre is stretched, and I feel like you guys, that just seems to be written into your DNA. The influences are multiple, yet it's cohesive, Well,
and being in a band, you've got 5, it doesn't really come from a singer-songwriter standpoint where it's like, okay, here's a thing, and then you've got kind of,
like Sting
players. Well,
dudes filling out
But even Sting, has Dominic, and there's awesome. A lot more collaboration there than you
than we think. Yeah,
but having 5 people with different influences, hammering out a basic idea, and then it can get stretched one way or the other depending on who really is like, I want this, I need this.
Yeah.
I'll bring a lot of that energy from a lyric and, idea standpoint, which graciously the guys, aren't really coming from that necessarily. So usually, that works out pretty well. It gives us an opportunity to do something a little more eclectic. And it's like, oh, okay, well now this song has a mandolin or it has a penny whistle or it's, whatever. It's just, it's more freeing to have as you were referring to the music as a canvas, like get a lot of different kind of canvases when everybody's kind of coming up with a musical idea that they can funnel to me and then come up with some ideas.
Yeah. As a writer, that's got to be hugely appealing,
Totally. More so than if it was just me with my 10 chords.
Right. Which can also be great.
Of course.
But, that's 7 more than I know. But, and it's someone asked, you always get the question is, how do you describe your band? Like, how do you describe musically? And it's really tough because we, like you said, we kind of bounce around with a few different genres and a few different things that all blend together. But I tell people basically we're it's a little bit like an old school 2-guitar rock band, 2 guitars, bass, drums, lead vocals. But you then take that formula and you twist it. So it's like, okay, maybe one of the guitars is acoustic. Maybe it's not a guitar, it's a mandolin or a cedal or a fiddle or, those things kind of just the same ideas. They just get twisted a little bit instrumentally because we've got play different things and Carter plays a whole bunch of different instruments and those different textures really, it's amazing if you just take the same part and you change the instrument and you change the voicings of the chords a little bit. It's like, okay, that
the whole
sounds
world opens up.
totally different than, where I started, which is what I love about the band, is because I can bring a simple idea with a few chords and strums and say, all right, why don't, and then the other guys will join in and bring totally different ideas that I hadn't even thought of to the table. And sometimes they work and are amazing. You're like, oh my God, that's amazing. Let's do that. Sometimes you're like, I don't know. Let's twist this. And they're like, oh, and they, you have a little back and forth. And next thing you know, you have something totally unique that is way different than where you started, which is what I love about this. Is
the magic.
And it's way more the sum than just the parts for me.
Yeah. There's a song on the album, You and Me, called You and Me, that Terry came up with the main guitar part, and then I wrote my part, and it seemed very kind of done, Yeah. It's like, okay. And then, whenever that happens, I'm like, oh, what do we do with Carter? I don't know. There's really not, I just don't really think there's anything there, for our lead guitarist. And so we're like, I don't know. Well, let's just, we'll just send it to him and see what he comes back with. And then he came back with this amazing melody that somehow worked, that played off of Terry's part without sounding superfluous.
Right.
Because, in our early days, everybody's playing something because everybody wants to be a part of it, right? But is it necessary? We've gotten much better at that.
Sure,
over the
maturity
years,
and
it's
all
like,
that,
hey.
sure.
But then it was just like, it opened up the song in a completely, wider direction. I was just like, dang, yes, okay.
never would have thought, he's like, how do you never would be able to tell him to play that. You just, something, he would just.
It's just something that came out of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, in my judgment, we call it eclecticism, is a huge strength of the band, And I'm curious, you maintain a dialogue with your fans. Do you hear that from them? Or do you hear from them? I love that I'm, consistently surprised.
And it's funny is that a fan, a few years ago, kind of a super fan, we were doing actually a house show at her house. They had hired us and had a small backyard party, and said, she came up before and she goes, we've seen you guys a lot. Because we don't come to see the same thing every night. We like to see the mistakes and the weird
the humanity
stuff and the humanity and how you guys react when something goes slightly different than it normally does. It makes the other four guys kind of change a little bit, because that's what we like to see is how you guys react to these like slightly different things night to night, as opposed to just hearing the same song playing to the tracks, every night. It's different. It's got some life to it, some energy, and sometimes you're always trying to hit it out of the park, and sometimes you do. Sometimes you have to make do with a ground rule double. It's like it's turned out cool, different than I was liking, not a home run, but still interesting.
That's cool.
Sometimes the fans want to see the guy fall off the trapeze.
Sure.
Where the trapeze,
we don't want to crash
the
and
trapeze
burn.
artist, specifically does not.
Right. That's not the goal.
That. It's not as fun for us, like last night, just completely forgetting words to the third song of the night. Just. I feel like we did interact a lot more live with the fans pre-pandemic, because we would go out after the shows and we would do a meet and greet, and that went away when the pandemic hit. And after a couple of times of just like getting sick on tour, and so it just made sense to kind of just not do that as much, which you kind of miss, because you do hear a lot of stories from fans, and you pick up kind of things you can read the room a little bit and kind of from a different perspective.
Absolutely.
And try to message people socially as much as we can, but it just gets hard.
Yeah.
Finding ways to connect is always something we need to keep in the front of our minds, because it can be something that you lose sight of with just all the work that it takes. And then at some point you've got to focus on, these band things.
Right, that need to be done. Yeah. And, it's interesting you said some fans have expressed that they like to see the mistakes and how you're going to react to that. I mean, isn't that like basically the story of the Grateful Dead and other bands like that? I mean, people keep going.
Yeah.
Because, as Bob Weir has said, I thought it was a great quote, was, well, we like to take the songs for a walk through the woods and see what we run into out there. Interesting. You guys, obviously, it's structured, but within that is room for dynamic interplay that makes each show, at least that I've seen, different.
Yeah, I think so. And, again, it is a little more structured, and there's part of me that like wants a certain kind of theatrical kind of presentation.
Yeah.
We invest in our lighting designer, and we come up with ideas visually, not just with the music, and but it's certainly not a Broadway show,
Right.
So there is room, but usually if we're on the road a lot, we'll mix up the set lists and to keep kind of a little bit of an edge for everybody, and rotate some songs in and out. Make sure we didn't play the same set from last year.
Yeah.
Make sure we're not playing the same 5 songs off the new album every night, getting everything in rotation. And I think that the more we do that, it kind of allows for people to relax into it a little bit. And
yes,
that's where those moments come from, is
absolutely,
when you're not bored with it, but you're comfortable enough where you're not thinking about the music as much.
Yeah.
People can.
That's really well said. You talked about all the other things you have to do besides play. I feel like Carbon Leaf is somewhat unique in that, probably just about a decade as an indie band before you signed with Vanguard.
Mm-hmm.
And then that experience, and now, an indie band again. Sorry, that 5 times fast. That's a really pretty interesting perspective. And I'm wondering about the pluses and minuses of each.
Yeah. Well, when we started out, obviously we were an indie band for 2003, maybe 12 or 13 years before we did a 3-record deal with Vanguard, which was like a 6-year period.
Yeah.
And then basically we went indie again around 2010 and up till now. So most of our career has been kind of indie. Us, or in the early in the earlier days, we couldn't buy help. We were just this young, fresh out of college, just band trying to figure out their thing, and literally just going door to door at colleges and fraternities and handing out press packs and stapling our flyers onto telephone poles and just doing all that. And then, doing all of our grassroots marketing, throwing out demos in the audience, that was our grassroots marketing, mailing out little postcards every month with our dates, super old school.
Yep.
And then
that was how it was done.
And then of course, that's how I had to do it. And then we started building the database when the internet came along. And so we did all of from the earliest, from how it used to be done to like how it was done. So it's a lot of energy away from the music, and then when you join with the label, that does come with more plug and play marketing that you don't have to worry about. Right. But it's also easy to get kind of seduced into thinking like
that they're handling it.
That they're handling it, like that mom and dad's got everything under control.
We're cool.
So it does take a little bit of edge off of that if you're not playing heads up ball.
Yeah.
And then when we left the label, it was kind of back to that old school. All right, well, if we want a team, we're going to build it out or do it ourselves, and that's kind of the way it's been. And there's pluses and minuses. You know what I mean?
Right, with everything.
It takes a lot more of our time, but we don't give away our rights, and
that part's huge.
I hope.
Yeah.
Hope.
Yeah.
Hope it's well worth it.
Yeah. You look happy. It's worth it. Do you have thoughts on that? I mean, you've talked about it a bit.
No, Barry kind of covered it. It's, interesting because we have been around for 30 years, we have covered all the technology.
Yeah.
Like it's, started out with, cassette demos, and then
He covered the technology.
and then into the CD and stapling flyers on telephone poles to, oh wow, we can upload an MP3 to a website now and people
Felt
can
huge.
hear it. It was
Yeah.
such a big thing, and now it's like, oh, okay. You kind of made it through MySpace and the first, social media-y stuff to where now it's like, okay, everybody's like, oh, well, you need is, you need content. You need vertical videos for Instagram and TikTok and stuff. And it's like, the idea is cool,
Yeah.
but it's a major time suck to actually do that. And it can be cool and it can be creative, but it's also, because it's so time intensive to do those things, just takes you away from the music of when you're trying to balance your family life and stuff, and you're not 22 where it's like, okay, I can work on music 24/7, 365. Now
Right.
it's like, oh, I've got 5 hours that I have to spend on stuff today, work related, because I'm home, and then I'm going to have to make dinner and take people to soccer practice or do whatever. It's like, what are my 5 hours going to be spent doing? And it's like, oh, I've got to spend 5 hours, figuring out how to retarget markets on audiences on Facebook. It's like, oh, this is terrible. Why am I doing this? It's like,
And it's taken away from your ability to be present, while you are home. Too, right?
Yeah, a little bit. So that's the only bummer, is that it takes the time to do stuff like that. But otherwise, it's really cool because you have the control. You control how you look, how you sound, how you're presented.
Right.
You can release stuff on your own schedule. You're not being pushed to, get the follow-up record out because the last one was successful, and now it doesn't matter that you don't have songs. You got to get in the studio and record them now because you're going to be on tour in the fall, and we need a single to release, and we're doing this. And it's like, oh my God, the ship is sailing away. I need to be on it. And, now it's like, all right, the record's not done yet. Let's take a breath. Let's listen to the songs. Okay, they do need a tweak. I do need to fix this backup vocal or add this guitar thing or change this, be able to, we built a studio at my house. So to be able to have the time and the luxury to not make snap decisions necessarily because you're on the clock. You're paying, $150, $200 an hour for studio time,
which went quickly,
and making deadlines. It's like, well, we put the deadline on ourselves, because I joked with somebody. It's like when we left the record label, it's like we fired the man, and now we made ourselves the man. Now I'm
promoted ourselves to the man.
Now I am the man. So it's like at some point you have to make those big business decisions. You have to do releases and stuff, but you can at least have a little bit more luxury of time and comfort to step back and have perspective as opposed to the mad rush.
Yeah, that's nice. And then having the studio at home, how because you want to keep some lines of like, we're not just working 14, 15-hour days, in our 20s, we got to lock out at the studio, bring beers, we'll be there all night, that's less appealing at this point.
Well, it's cool.
Well, somewhat less appealing.
It's different because that was fun and awesome, and I wouldn't change those experiences. Like pulling an all-nighter in the studio and going bleary-eyed to the diner at 7 a.m.
Felt great.
It was awesome. Yeah. It was a cool thing, It was like, all right, we're doing this, but now it's like, now my ears are burnt because we've been working on this, mix for 2 hours straight, and I get to go in the cul-de-sac and play basketball with the kids for a half an hour.
What a way to clear out the ears.
Get the cobwebs, and then we get back to work, or we can come back after dinner, or we've had enough for today and we can come back tomorrow.
That's cool.
You get those, just orient your time differently.
Yeah. Do you feel that that's helped keep the sort of brotherhood and friendship and band alive? Like being able to kind of approach it that way, to work when it makes sense to work?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, because it still is a business,
Of course.
and it takes a lot to keep going. And Barry and I do a lot of the work, so it's takes a lot of time to do those things. But it's nice, and like Barry said, being able to tailor our touring to 80, 90 shows a year as opposed to 200 shows a year really changes the ball game too, as far as time goes.
For me, I find, Terry's, because the studio's at his house, because he's the engineer, and he has, an active family with 3 kids, there is a different schedule that he, has out of necessity and different priorities than I do, who's single, right, and doesn't necessarily live in Richmond. And so, what I've found over the years is that, I mean, I've about myself is that I work better when I can immerse myself in something for a length of time. I used to feel like I could do a lot of multitask things pretty okay. That's not so much these days. Like, it just agitates me, and so the longer I can focus on something, I think the better I am. So for something as ambitious as 12-song album, which we hadn't done in like 10 years, it took us a long time to kind of get it, written and then recorded and then mixed and then produced and then remixed and produced, and
so everybody's happy.
All that back and forth. And so I have a tendency to want to like go longer and try to compress the overall time arc of a project, because then it starts getting into other parts of the business that we need to focus on, like touring and writing the next one, and the content and all that stuff. So it's it's kind of big push and pull sometimes, where we're kind of where there's that kind of tension.
Yeah.
But like he said, the important thing is not to just be like, well, okay, well, fine, we set the deadline, so I guess this is where we are, and we both have certain things in the songs that we're listening for and we want, and we can both kind of go at each other and go like, okay, we'll push it back then. We'll push the project back. Well, yeah, we got to. We got to fix this thing. We're both saying that from different angles, and so we've learned to kind of like we've learned our lesson about like the deadline. Set a deadline, but you know what? If it's not done, it's not done, and we just got to rearrange everything else around it.
So the music is the boss.
Yeah,
it's not cooked until it's cooked.
Because we have stuff that we've recorded, and we're like, should have done this and that. No, we're just taking a step back, It's like, it's a really good demo.
What about well, I wanted to end by asking you, we talked about this a little bit, but the sort of why music matters question from your perspective, it always matters. I always feel like, I've seen it change lives myself, family members, people I love dearly, in a positive way, and that it can speak to what's best in us and unite us, in ways that other things can't. In this particular moment, that seems like hugely even more important than usual. I wonder if you guys think that it matters now more than ever, or are we always having the now more than ever moments cyclically over time? I don't know.
I think it matters to the people that it matters to in your world, and then over there's that other thing that matters to someone over there, and whether you can weave all of that together with one song or one hive mind, I don't know about that. As an artist, you can't just can't be necessarily worried about like trying to like play to the back of the room. You know, I think the best place to start is just to say, this jazz is me or us, and let's lay it down the way we hear it, and then let's see, you know, what community you can build from that,
Right.
and let them feel that energy, you know, amongst themselves, you know, as fans or between the band and the fans
In an organic way.
in an organic way. And then just, I mean, beyond that, I don't really know.
Yeah. Nobody does.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it matters a lot, and you know, I feel like in the last few months, I found myself listening to a whole lot more music and tuning out a lot of other stuff, like where I was listening to a lot of news and things in the last couple years, different, you know, podcasts and different things like that. And I feel like in the last 6 months, I've really fired up, like, man, I haven't listened to the Allman Brothers in forever. And a song came on the other day. I was like, man, I haven't.
Still awesome. I'm still
awesome.
moved
And I was
by
like,
this.
you know,
Yeah.
I'm going to have Alexa play a whole bunch more, you know, Allman Brothers for me, because I was like, man, I haven't heard the Allman Brothers. I used to love the Allman Brothers. Why haven't I listened to the Allman Brothers in 15 years? And like, yeah, crank it up. And, you know, it's
that.
nice to rediscover the stuff that got you stoked on music in the first place. You know, I'm a huge old school AC/DC fan, and I've started popping up in my feed now, like all these classic videos. I'm like, yeah, I used to love this. Why, you know, I haven't listened to AC/DC in forever. I need to check that out again. And it's like, well, look at that, you know, old
Isn't it great when it
footage.
still appeals?
So that's a great kind of answer to the question you're asking. I feel like maybe, you know, where there's so much information that you can, you know, what do you choose to like focus your time on, right? And you know, do you listen to all the chatter of the world all day in your free time, or do you lean into the music and you know and you know, and be in your own thoughts and take control of your own agency a little bit.
And when you realize how much time can get sucked out of your life scrolling, you know, when you're looking at your phone, next thing you know, it's like, oh, I was watching this video and this guy was showing me how to make barbecue, you know, Kansas City style, and I was really excited by it. And then now 2 hours have gone by, and I don't know what happened to my life. I'm down this rabbit hole, and I haven't learned anything. I haven't done anything. I haven't made any barbecue.
Now I'm really hungry.
Yeah. So it's really cool to, you know, I've been like, all right, I'm not gonna listen to the news. I'm not gonna scroll. I'm just gonna put on some tunes while I'm doing these other things, and then get excited about it. And I've been encouraging my kids as well to not, you know, this is sort of bigger than music, but not watch other people doing cool stuff,
but try to do stuff,
but actually do stuff yourself. It's like, why are you watching somebody do cool stuff on your phone when you could go outside? You've got a skateboard, you've got a bike, you've got a guitar, you've got a piano, you've got a boat. Get the hell out there, you know, live your life. Don't spend your life watching other people do cool stuff while you're sitting on your couch, you know.
I mean, that to me is a really big lesson, you know, and engage in your own life. Don't observe it.
Yeah.
Well said. I really appreciate you guys sharing that with me. Last thing I'd like to know is next album.
Right. You sound like the AR guy.
I don't want to be the A&R guy. I totally don't.
Great album. When's the next one coming out?
Like Paul Schaefer and Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
Wearing Jordache and going, when's the album coming out, boys? I'm just curious as a fan.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I mean, we're still, you know, introducing people to the new album.
Yeah, and still touring it,
and really will be through this year. But it's definitely on my mind. Yeah. You know, it gets on my mind pretty quickly after a project's done. You know, and usually when we have to like start thinking about all the content, and I'm starting to be like, next project.
I get it,
but right now it's not. Yeah, I don't really have a firm idea, but I've got a few ideas, and I just need to again. Haven't had the kind of time to sit down and like really immerse. So I'll like at some point here soon, I'll like take a whole week and I'll start
dig in,
talking to the guys and be like, "Hey man, you been working on anything? And got any riffs for me?"
So
listening to the our playlist of demos, because we got tons of demos, kind of unpainted songs, and just kind of start going through stuff and looking for little sparks, and then start seeing if I can kind of weave them together a little bit.
It's really the exciting time in the process, feeling.
Yeah, where you kind of, you just have a few loose ideas, but you don't really have the story yet, And then once you can lock onto that, it gets a little easier.
Like lump of clay, and then you're like, wait, I can see a shape starting to emerge, That's a great feeling.
Yeah. It's undiscovered country.
Yeah, always. Mm-hmm. Even after 33 years, that's a cool thing, right?
Yeah. But you got to show up and listen on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of clearing the decks a little bit.
Yeah. Were you going to say something else?
I was just going to say that. Personally, my goal is just to play more guitar, clean out the studio has become a catch-all warehouse junk room at the moment. So I, in the next couple weeks, want to clean it out so that I can just go. It's easy to go out and pick up a guitar and plug it in and make some music. Yeah. And it's right now I'm at a space where I have to think about it, move stuff out of the way to get to it. And it's like, that's not fun. I just want to go out and play guitar for an hour and not have to think about everything else. So, that's where the ideas, then the more you play, the more ideas bubble up and the more stuff happens. It's, find myself distracted by other things other than actually playing music. So my personal goal is to just play more music so that more ideas come up and more things. And then we record the, musical demos, and we give them to Barry for lyrics. So he has literally 25, 30 years worth of stuff that may be just an iPhone recording of a couple of chords. It may be the full band in a room together coming up with ideas, but we have this sort of, chest of stuff. And I feel like I haven't added a whole lot to the chest in a while. So I want to get back to actually playing, and Carter lives down the street, get Carter to come over and play, be able to bounce ideas off each other again, kind of like we used to do a few years ago before everything got busier with family and kids and stuff. To get back now, it's like, all right, now the kids can kind of take care of their sort of teenagers, they can sort of do their own thing, let's get back to songwriting and jamming. And
there's a great quote. It has to do with Jeff Beck, but I guess someone was interviewing Jeff at his home, and they're like, everywhere there's just like, super expensive 1957 Strats laying around, and I guess the guy said, Jeff, why are all these, these beautiful guitars just laying there? He's like, if I don't see them, I don't play them.
Yeah.
It's a great metaphor for like, clearing the headspace, or just like making it easy on yourself to create.
Doing something subconsciously,
right?
Just like you could be sitting on the couch thinking about something else.
You don't know, and all of a sudden there's incoming, as Keith Richards would say, incoming idea.
Yep, got to be ready.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you guys' time, man.
Jeff, this is awesome. Thanks.
It's very good to talk to you. Looking forward to tonight's show and what the future brings. But I appreciate your time.
Cheers. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, you guys.
Today's episode of Why Music Matters is brought to you by 42 North Brewing Company. 42 North believes in listening locally and drinking locally. If you're out at a live music venue, ask for 42 North. And if you're a venue owner, you might want to think about adding 42 North to your lineup of taps. And maybe I'll see you out there at a gig. If so, maybe I'll buy you a 42 North Borderland or a Day Trekker. First one's on me.